Hi, and thank you for joining me. The word for today is Vishinu. She knew. Vishinu. Well done, guys. You just said burgundy. Today's case is going to be about James Bulger. So before we get started, I just want to give you a quick disclaimer. All the information I'm giving you is already found in the public domain. I also don't mean any disrespect to anyone I talk about in the video. This is for educational purposes only. And I get all the information from the internet, I compile them and I bring you the video. And I will also be giving my opinions and my own views around the case that I'm talking about. Thank you so much. Also, trigger warning, this involves the horrific abuse of a 2-year-old baby followed by his death. So if this is something that triggers you in any way, then by all means step away from the video now and I will see you in the next one. And for everybody else, thank you so much for staying with me. So let's get started. On February the 12th, 1993, Robert Thompson and Jon Venables abducted a 2-year-old boy named James Bulger from the new Strand Shopping Centre in Bootle, England. They then led him to an area called Walton in Liverpool, where they tortured him, beat him to death, and abandoned his body on a railway track in an effort to make his murder look like an accident. If you are not familiar with the tragic murder of James Bulger, the details will shock you just as it did the whole of the UK at the time of this unspeakable act, and even the world. Today, like I said, we are covering the case of James Bulger, so let's get straight into it. On 16th of March 1990, James Patrick Bulger is born in Kirkby, England, to his parents Ralph and Denise. Before his birth, Denise and Ralph already lost a baby daughter who was stillborn, so you can imagine just how over the moon they were to welcome baby James into the world. With his big blue eyes and light brown hair, he is a happy baby, always smiling and making everyone around him laugh. Denise always wanted to be a mom. She came from a big family and she would be the babysitter of her siblings, and she completely loved it. So when she moved in a small flat with Ralph, it was everything that she wanted. Even though the flat was quite small, they were living in a lovely community, they were happy, and it was enough for Denise and Ralph. When James was born, James was loved by everyone. You would instantly know when James went into a room, you would see the bouncy hair running past you. Although independent, James was definitely a mama's boy. He would never leave his mom's side, you would always see him on her knee. He just loved to make people laugh. He was a little character.
Sit together on a couch, go on. Go on, all sing happy birthday for us then. Bounce.
Having lost another baby, of course that Denise and Ralph were simply in love with James. 25-year-old Denise doted on him and she was very protective of him. But just before his 3rd birthday, a simple trip to the shops was about to rip this beautiful young family apart. Friday, 12th of February, 1993. It's a really cold morning. Denise gets a visitor to her house. It was one of her brother's girlfriend who said that she's going to Bootle Strand Shopping Centre and asked if Denise would join her. Of course that Denise agreed, so because it's really cold outside, she puts a big thick coat on James along with a hat, scarf and gloves, and then they all head out. For the first time, Denise decides not to take James' buggy with her. This would be the first time she would ever go out without his buggy. Even if she had to hold it and carrying it around herself, that buggy would always be with them. But on this occasion, Denise decided to leave it in the hallway at home. It's around 1:45 p.m. when they get into the Strand. They don't spend such a long time in there, and on her way out of the Strand, Denise decides to stop by the butcher shop AR Times to buy something to cook for dinner, and then they would go home. They get into the butcher shop and James starts running all around the shop and he's quicker than Denise is, so she constantly needs to catch him. Denise is feeling really uneasy about this because she had to keep an eye on him constantly so he doesn't wander off. She puts in her pork chops order and for a few seconds she lets go of James's hand so she can reach for her purse and pay for the order. In a few seconds, James is gone. He just vanishes. Denise is in a panic, understandably, and so she rushes outside of the shop in the shopping center and starts looking around for James, but James is nowhere to be found. For Denise Bulger, her worst nightmare is coming true. She goes to reception to let them know that James is missing. The staff then decide to put a tannoy announcement throughout the shopping center. At the same time, Denise is still looking for James. She tries to figure out where could he go. Maybe there was, something that caught his attention and maybe he wandered off. And then soon Denise realizes that James really loves the rides in the shopping center. The ones where you would put coins in and then you can use the ride. Like you have animals, trains, cars and so on. You put a coin in there and then you can ride for a bit. So Denise decides to check them out. She is sure that James would be at one of them. Denise goes to every single ride in that shopping center, but sadly there is absolutely no trace of James. Denise is told by staff at the shopping center that some other shops upstairs had James, so she rushes upstairs to the shops in the hopes that he is there, but unfortunately that wasn't James. Other shop staff keep sending her from one shop to the other, but James is nowhere to be found. After the shopping center security staff failed to locate James, they called the police. When Denise heard that the police was being called, she knew instantly that this was serious. She describes James again as wearing a blue anorak with a hood and mustard color lining, silver colored tracksuit bottoms and white trainers. When police arrive after 4 p.m., James was already gone for 40 minutes. He'd gone missing at 3:45 p.m. A young police constable, Mandy Waller, who carried out a thorough search of the shopping center, is comforting Denise, who by this point is deeply distraught. Denise tells Mandy that James is nowhere in the shopping center. She already looked for him everywhere. She even went to the car park, and all Denise wanted was to get out of the shopping center and just start looking for James in the streets. I think that at this point Denise had a gut feeling that James was not in the building anymore. By this point, it's getting dark outside. Denise is worried that James, being only 2 years old, he doesn't know the area, it's really cold outside, it's also getting dark, he will most probably be frightened on his own out there. By 5:30 p.m., the shopping center closes for the day. At Walton Lane police station, cars are being sent out. James's details are being given to taxi drivers, bus drivers. They start getting the word out. The police launch a major search for a missing child in Bootle, Liverpool. What starts off as a simple hunt for a missing child turns into something sinister when, by Friday night, he's still not been found. 4 hours after James went missing, Merseyside Police CID takes over the investigation. Jim Fitzsimmons, a detective inspector for Merseyside Police, remembers this unusual call, informing them about an incident which would generally not escalate to the CID. The helicopter had been sent out. Operational Support Division was engaged in the search. All available officers in Bootle were looking for James. The Operational Support Division had a whole team of 18 constables, 2 sergeants and 1 inspector, all searching for James. The canal was also searched on the same day. After the Strand Shopping Centre closed for the day, Denise didn't really want to leave the building. She just didn't want to think about having to live without James when she went in with him. She felt that she would let James down for leaving. The detective asked for all key holders of the shops in the centre to go there to their respective shops, as he was on his way there himself. There were 200 shops in that building, so they had to get 200 people back to the centre after it had closed for the public and opened the stores again. Each of the key holders was asked to look thoroughly in their respective shops for any sign of James. Sadly, this proved useless. James was not found. James is now missing for 5 hours. Police managed to trace a witness who saw a young child crying by the canal which runs alongside the Strand. Even Detective Jim is worried about James, especially because of the proximity of the water. If James had been wandering around, this could prove quite dangerous. James has now been missing for 9 hours. The police and security staff at the shopping centre worked through the night to go through the CCTV footage. The CCTV system at that time, it wasn't as you would see it now. It was more like a time-lapse system. It had 16 cameras and each camera took one image every 3 seconds. So you would have to go through all of these still shots from all the cameras and kind of follow the photos to be able to connect them to each other. Not to mention that the photo quality was extremely bad. At 1:10 a.m., there is also police still looking for James outside when Detective Jim receives a phone call from one of the other detectives at the Strand to let him know they've seen something on the CCTV. Their efforts are rewarded when they pinpoint James leaving the butcher shop earlier that day. Tracking his movements, the police search for further clues. They confirm that moments after James is seen exiting the butcher shop, Denise also leaves the shop and is seen on the ground floor hunting for her son. Unknown to her, James is now on the top floor and appears to be following 2 boys. The footage reveals the haunting grey image of the last recording moments of James Bulger.
Merseyside Shopping Centre, from where he was fatally assaulted in February 1993. It was a case that caused anger and revulsion across Britain.
2 boys can be seen with James. 1 boy is holding his hand. They are all heading towards the exit and the direction of the Leeds Liverpool canal. Detective Jim couldn't believe it. He had no idea what this meant, and quite honestly, he didn't expect to see what he saw. This is when police know that this was an abduction. 2-year-old James was abducted. But the police were at one point convinced that there was another person involved. 2 boys couldn't just plan to abduct James without some adult being involved giving them instructions. Maybe the boys were taking James to this adult. It's just something that you can't really wrap your mind around. 2 boys to abduct a baby. Shockingly, James Bulger wasn't the first child that they targeted that day. They first attempted to lure a 3-year-old girl and her 2-year-old brother away from their mother. Even though they were unsuccessful, Robert Thompson and Jon Venables didn't give up. 12 hours in, and by now James is reported as missing. In less than 1 minute and a half, James was being led out, marched out from the other end of the Strand, and he's gone in less than 1 minute and a half. Let that sink in for a moment. Less than 1 minute and a half from the opposite side of the Strand. He was being pulled by the hand by one of the two boys, and they very quickly exited the shopping center. He was taken outside, and all three of them were seen walking by the post office near the canal. The most devastating thing is that whilst everybody was searching for James inside that shopping center, and the focus was the shopping center, James was already gone, passing by a lot of busy shoppers inside and outside in a very busy area. Even though the Strand was built in the 60s and it kind of looked, quite old on the outside, it was still very much used, and almost everyone in Liverpool would go there to do their shopping. So it was a busy area. And I guess you would think that, some people would notice a 2-year-old being led out of the shopping center and they would maybe think that something's not right. But it didn't seem to be the case. Actually, hold on. They were seen by many people, but no one did anything. Yeah, no adults did anything. Even though many people on the streets who saw them, all three boys, believed that the three boys were siblings, others were concerned about Robert's and John's aggressive behavior towards James Bulger. Some witnesses later reported that the older boys roughed up James in plain sight, kicking, punching and shaking him. While some adults stopped to ask the children a few questions, they all let the boys go on their way, apparently believing that James was either being taken home or to the police station. Many of them would later express regret for not doing anything. Quite honestly, having researched this case, I can't believe these adults. There were clear signs that James was being assaulted in broad daylight in plain sight for 3 miles, where they have been seen by many adults. A woman who saw the boys in the window allegedly attacking James, she decided that the best course of action for her would be to just pull back her curtains and pretend that nothing happened and just go back to her usual business. Because, why not allow 2 boys to attack a toddler? They are kids, right? Nothing weird about it. There was another lady, allegedly. She was with her baby outside and she passed by the boys. They were close to the police station. Now this lady, genuinely, she wanted to help James. She was with her baby in one hand and in the other hand she had some shoppings. And she didn't know how she could help James. She wanted to physically take him from the boys and get him to the police station. She wanted to hold him, but she couldn't because she already had her baby in one hand and shopping in the other hand. So she spotted another woman walking her dog. So she's asking this woman if she could help. She only asked her if she could hold her baby so that she can take James to the police station. And do you know what the woman with the dog did? You won't believe this. She said that she can't let go of her dog to hold the baby because, for some people, animals are more important than babies. It's just infuriating. It really is. So the lady sees that this woman doesn't want to help her. She couldn't do much. And John and Robert told her that they will take James to the police station. This lady was reluctant. It's like she had a feeling that something is not quite right. But she couldn't do anything and she trusted the boys to take James to the station. There were other adults seeing James crying, asking for his mommy, seeing him bruised, even attacked, and they did nothing. It was a 3-mile trip on foot in a busy area. People saw, but people decided they will just ignore because, that's the best course of action, right? 17 hours into the disappearance, there is a press conference being held. Denise and Ralph are both attending. Denise by this point is chain smoking. Her baby vanished and she blames herself. She blames herself for not taking his buggy with them. She blames herself for letting go of his hand.
If you want to sit here. Yeah, sit down there.
This is Superintendent Mike Hogarth. This is Denise and Ralph, James is mum and dad. And this is Detective Chief Inspector Jeff MacDonald. Mr. Hogarth will read.
I was just buying meat out the butcher's. I turned away from for a minute and then I looked down and he's gone.
Denise, what is your appeal to the public?
If you've got me baby, just bring them back.
Right, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
If you want to hang on, Mr. MacDonald will they have information.
She's just existing at this point. All she wants is James back. They are both destroyed. The media was shown photos from the CCTV footage and announced that they were looking to speak with two youths. According to the footage, police think that the two young boys are white, they are teenagers, and one of them is wearing a leather jacket. At this point, everybody, including the police and James's parents, were relieved when they saw James on the footage with the young boys, because everyone believes that he is safe and the boys will just take James to a place of safety. Maybe they thought that he got lost and they were trying to reunite him with his parents. After the press conference, information and tips were constantly coming in, even more than the police could handle. On Saturday, remember, James was abducted on Friday, just the previous day. Frogmen, or as you might know them as well as divers, have been called in to assist with the search, and they were searching the canal. The police was searching tunnels, roads, drains, shops, landfill areas. They would ask people to search their back gardens, everything really. With the press conference and all the information being shared, Detective Jim really believed that James would be found by Saturday. On Sunday, 14th of February 1993, Valentine's Day, 2 days after James went missing, the police and James's family have tried everything possible to find him. Patrol cars have been used with loudspeakers, press conferences have been called appealing for the two boys in the Strand Shopping Centre to come forward, and the manhunt is underway, searching the nearby canals and wasteland areas. 39 hours in, and the police even combed waste ground near a reservoir. A member of the public said that she saw a boy like James with some youths the previous day. Police also responded to another possible sighting of James. The location was over 1 mile from the shopping center. On Friday, when James went missing, police was told he's missing at 4:20 p.m. At 4:20 p.m., James was already near the reservoir, 1 mile away from the shopping center. He was seen by a woman with two boys in the Breeze Hill area. 48 hours into the search, Constable Mandy tries to get Denise into her car to go for a ride, to get some fresh air, to clear her mind, so Denise could clear her head a bit. And that's when Mandy receives a call to go back to the police station immediately and turn her radio off. That's when Denise knew that they found him. They found James. Hope for a happy ending soon disappears when a young boy rushes into Walton Lane police station. Detective Jim receives a call saying he needs to go to Walton Lane because a body has been found. A body has been found on the railway tracks. It's less than 150 yards from the back of the police station in Walton, 2 miles from the Strand Shopping Centre. What the police discover horrifies the nation and the entire world. Detective Jim went to the scene assuming this was an accident. Maybe James got lost and he was hit by a train. But Detective Jim soon realized that this was no accident. The body was spotted by 4 schoolboys who were playing by the railway. They ran home, told their parents, and then the police got informed. The police now have a murder to solve and 2 young boys to track down.
Police searching for the Merseyside toddler James Bulger say a body's been found on a railway embankment close to where he went missing. There's been no formal identification, but the police have confirmed that the body is that of a small boy. The 2-year-old disappeared after becoming separated from his mother at a shopping centre on Friday.
Protected under a police tent lies the body of a young boy, found this afternoon by children playing on a railway embankment. Police hunting for missing toddler James Bulger had maintained their optimism for most of the day that he may yet turn up safe and well. The body was discovered right next to a police station on the side of a regularly used railway. Officers brought in lighting equipment to enable them to work after darkness fell. 2-year-old James was last seen over 48 hours earlier outside this butcher's shop in Bootle. Security cameras photographed his apparent abduction by 2 youths. As they walked out of the centre, one witness actually challenged them, but the youths said they were taking James to his mother. Police had spent much of the day searching both used and unused railway lines in the area. They'd already combed other wasteland and derelict buildings. As the search continued, his father made another appeal for the boy's safe return.
We've never been through anything like this before, so we're obviously at all about it, especially the wife.
Detectives in the incident room are now awaiting the results of the post-mortem inquiry. A Home Office pathologist is expected to confirm the cause of the boy's death late tonight. Also crucial to the process of piecing together the sequence of events will be the estimation of when he died. With that information to hand, detectives will tomorrow renew their hunt for the 2 youths caught on camera.
And Jonathan Munro joins us now from Liverpool. Jonathan, is there any doubt about the identity of the body?
Very little doubt indeed now, Julia, I think. The formal identification will be made late tonight, maybe even in the small hours when the Home Office pathologist has finished his work on the post-mortem. But I was speaking to a close relative of the parents earlier this evening who said that they are devastated, so the news has clearly been broken to them, and I think all the indications are very much in place that this is indeed the remains of James.
Jonathan, what effect has this whole episode had on the community up there?
There's a great deal of anger that such a young boy has apparently become the victim of a crime like this. Anger which started off as a determination that the 2 youths caught on camera should be detained by the police, a determination which was reflected in the number of phone calls the police incident room received, which was quite enormous, dozens and dozens of reported sightings. And I think if the pathologist confirms it's James, that can only turn to more anger here.
Jonathan Munro, thank you very much.
Detective Jim prays that the body found was not James's body. Sergeant Phil Roberts couldn't believe the scene he saw, and he just asked himself why, and why cause so many injuries. James's uncle was the one who identified the body, and when he came out of that room, he came out a completely broken man, speechless. The realization of what he saw hit him. When Denise found out, she let out a horrific scream and she just collapsed in herself. She was in denial. She didn't want to believe it. The way that the body was when it was found, police couldn't really have an opinion on what happened, but one thing was clear. James had devastating injuries and all evidence pointed out to this being a murder. The police now had to identify children between 10 years old and 18 years old who had violent behavior or were previously involved in any kind of assaults, be it known to the public or in the police records. The photos of the 2 boys from the CCTV footage were plastered all over the city, in the news, on leaflets, just about everywhere. Police really needed to find them. At this point, James's murder is known by everyone in Liverpool and outside of Liverpool. In fact, news spread all over the world. Whoever murdered James was still at large, and the question in everyone's mind was, will the killer strike again? Liverpool was in a complete panic. Children James's age would be walked around the city with reins, their hands held tightly by the parents. Anyone's child could be next. The CCTV from the Strand was of such a poor quality that police couldn't get much details from it, but they believed that they were looking for boys between 12 to 15 years old. They were even looking through their own systems in the hopes that something would pop up. There was an area in Liverpool which had quite a lot of kids who were creating trouble before, so they were all rounded up and interviewed. Over the course of the investigation, over 60 boys were either brought in for questioning or they were being questioned. The police would appeal again to the public for information. They wanted to speak to anyone who was on the same route that James and the two boys have taken. The evidence suggested James travelled on foot from the Strand to the railway.
Police on Merseyside say that 2-year-old James Bulger, who disappeared from a shopping precinct at the weekend, was horribly murdered and then dumped on a railway line. They say that someone must know the identity of the two boys who took James from the precinct.
Inch by inch, the police have searched the railway line where 2-year-old James Bulger's body was found yesterday. The scene is still protected from the elements for forensic work. The body itself was removed late last night. His uncle had identified him. It had been spotted earlier by 4 schoolboys playing.
And as we come out walking, you could just see it there as you looked on the floor, just right there, by the little path.
Because I said, it's a baby. There's no clicked on like, because that baby went missing. And then like, we all ran towards the bridge, got down and went to Walton Lane.
What did you do once you'd found it? Who did you tell?
The police.
The blurred images of 2 youths seen taking James away are now all over the city. The public say detectives hold the key to finding them. They believe James was killed locally, then his abandoned body was hit by a train.
We know it is a murder inquiry. There's not, as we'd first hoped, we were going to find James and return him to his parents. It is horrific what has taken place, and there must somewhere be somebody who will know the identity of the 2 boys who were seen with James.
James's blue and mustard hood, seen here in a security video, has now been recovered. It had been missing from his clothing but was found nearby. Police have set up a temporary base in the shopping centre. They're warning parents that other children could be vulnerable.
For goodness sake, keep tight hold of your children. Poor James only went missing from his mother for a matter of seconds, and he'd gone and disappeared.
It was a warning heeded as parents picked up their children from school.
I've said to him that if he doesn't hold my hands, then, you know, an naughty man's going to take him and all that.
It's on your own doorstep, isn't it? I mean, I come to Strand every day with my kids. Of course, it's frightened everybody.
The shadow of this murder is hanging heavily over Liverpool. As flowers built up around the scene, James's family have spent the day being counselled by specially trained officers.
A business called AMAC on the corner of Hawthorne Road at the roundabout with Breeze Hill had a camera covering their car park. The owner checked the camera and he saw James with 2 boys walking past the building. The police was informed of this. After seeing the pictures from the camera, the police deduced that the boys were not as tall as they initially suspected, comparing their height with a small wall they passed by. At this stage, police had to open up to the fact that perhaps they were looking for children even younger than 12 years old. Detective Jim receives information which leads to a breakthrough in the investigation. A woman had been at Walton Lane police station. She said that she was at a family friend on Friday, 12th of February, and the friend's son came home in a mess. He was dirty, he had bits of paint on his jacket, and he'd been skipping school with another boy from the same school. He was 10 years old. This was the same day that James had gone missing. Detective Jim thought that this boy might look like the one in the CCTV footage, but probably he's not. This boy was Jon Venables. A neighbor called into police to say that she believed Jon could be involved. Jon had been out skipping school that day and he came home with his jacket covered in paint. The neighbor told police that Jon Venables went to St. Mary's School in Bedford Road. With this information, Detective Jim calls the school to ask if Jon had been attending on the Friday, and he was informed that Jon wasn't there. He was skipping school with another boy called Robert Thompson. Robert was persistently skipping school. Him and his family lived in Walton village, close to where James was found. Even though Detective Jim couldn't quite believe that a 10-year-old boy would be involved, he felt that maybe he needed to look closer into this. Two boys born 10 days apart in August 1982 in Liverpool. Two boys who became friends out of breaking the rules. They played truant, which is skipping school. They stole sweets. They terrorized old ladies. Then, one Friday in February, they discovered a new rule to break. They murdered a 2-year-old boy. The beginning of their friendship was suspicious enough. They bumped into each other literally in the school playground in the middle of a fight. When the fight ended, impressed by each other's performance, they became friends. Quote, "I thought he was alright," said Jon Venables. That was in September 1991, 17 months before they killed James Bulger. They had a lot in common. Both of them struggled at school and were placed into the year below their age. Both had parents who had separated. Both had a need to attract attention, which they achieved through a variety of issues they created. Robert Thompson was born on 23rd of August 1982, and he was the shorter one. Some people believed the boys were as old as 12 or 13, but when they met they were both only 10 years old. Robert looked like a sweet child. Everyone called him chubby because of his round face. He had dark short hair, and his mates called him a girl because whenever there was something on his mind, he would suck on his thumb. Everton was his football team. He was a loyal fan, even though he didn't go often to Goodison Park. His mind was too restless to take up other hobbies for long, but he liked collecting trolls, those dolls with ugly faces and spiky fluorescent hair. His mother gave him pocket money to buy them, but usually he would steal them from local shops. Jon Venables was born a few days earlier than Robert on 13th of August 1982, and he was slim and taller than Robert, just over 5 feet. He had a pale complexion and brown eyes. His mother called him hyperactive. He was very rarely able to sit still. He couldn't hang on to a football team for long. He kept shifting his support. He started with Liverpool, but by the time of the murder, he switched to Blackburn Rovers. He wanted a Rovers strip for his birthday present. His mother didn't really like the idea very much because they cost £35 each at a time. John loved computers as well. He had a Game Boy console and really wanted a Sega machine, and when the boys played truant, he would head straight for the computer game corner of Tandy's or Dixon's. He carried books on wrestling and wildlife in his school bag. Those who knew him well said that he was a very emotional child, prone to mood swings. Walton, where they both lived, is neither the best nor the worst the city has to offer. The street in which Robert lived was typical, a row of terraced bay windowed houses that stretched from the railway line back towards the city. At the end of the street you had the moneylenders. Walton Village Financial Services would lend you £300 for Christmas and demand a total of £460 in repayment. The other shops in the area included the Red Garden Cheaper, where Robert used to pop in with his brothers most nights for a 25p bag of chips. The boys lived off chips. With jobs few and far in between, unemployment levels were more than twice the national average in Walton. In some families, this was the third generation to be unemployed. The fathers of both Robert and John were unemployed. Robert had a reputation in the neighborhood for being a troublemaker. He stayed away from school so often that the local police called him a professional truant. On the days that he was at school, he liked to stir things up. He would call people names and get them to chase him. Very few were patient enough to be friends with him. Only his younger brother and a couple of other boys who lived near him. Robert's family were outcast and very well known to police. It was the kind of family neighbors compare themselves against and then they feel better. Robert's mother, Anne-Marie Thompson, 39 years old at the time, got the house from the local housing trust after her husband, Robert, ran off with a woman from Stockport in 1988. He left her to bring up 6 children alone. The week after he walked out, the family's home burned down in an accidental fire. She found it quite hard raising the kids up in the neighborhood. Quote, "The attitude when you live where we live is that you have to be tough or else you don't survive." End of quote, she said. Quote again, "When you have got people in the area threatening to blow your kneecaps off every moment of the day, that's just the way they are. They deal with drugs, they deal with everything. Their kids have got everything. Look at mine. I'm bringing up on my own, but if I went round and screwed every warehouse, my children would have everything too." End of quote. Anne-Marie worked as an office cleaner until 1991 when she got pregnant again by another man who also left her. Money was always a struggle, and she got through the first years drinking in Hickson's top house off St. Mary's Lane. Occasionally, when the children would be left sitting outside the house for too long, one of the neighbors would call the police to go and get her out of the top house. Anne could hold her drink and no one ever saw her staggering home. Her husband came back to Walton now and again to see his mother, but he never came to see the boys. Anne-Marie would send their boys up the street to give their fathers the fingers through the bay windows of his mother's house. In the last few years, she stopped drinking in the top house and she tried to keep things together, but sadly she couldn't. Most of the boys were bright. Robert was number 5 of 7. In Crosby's corner shop, Ian, the next oldest to Robert, was able to sum up the shopping in his mind before the cash register rang up the total. He was always getting prices for maths at school. Ian was clever enough to know that to survive, he just had to get out. Get out and get into Dyson Hall Children's Center, the only residential care school in the country just outside Liverpool. In 1990, after his mother beat him, he went to social services and asked them to put him in care. Since his 14-year-old brother Philip had already tried to stab him, the social services agreed. The boys at Dyson Hall were the object of envy among their mates because they were given tracksuits and trainers on arrival and even went on trips to Alton Towers. But after 1 year, they let Ian out again. So of course, he could only go back home. After some time, he tried to commit suicide so that he can get back into the school. He took a jar of paracetamol and it worked. He got back in. But Robert was stuck in Walton with his older brothers and the baby. There was a pattern of bullying with the older boys picking on their younger brothers down the line. Robert passed this down the line, bullying his 8-year-old brother into playing truant. Robert's feelings towards his half-brother also appeared to have been indifferent. He later told police he would not have murdered James Bulger because, quote, "If I wanted to kill a baby, I'd kill my own, wouldn't I?" End of quote. He had that strange combination of obsession with and hatred of possessions that is characteristic of children who never enjoyed any of their own. He would steal objects that he neither needed or wanted, then just chuck them away in the street. Once, he stole decorating borders from a DIY shop which he discarded at regular intervals to mark his way home. Some neighbors claim they saw the boy catching birds into traps in the backyard of his home, while one local youth claimed he saw the boy pull the heads off live baby pigeons. When a police officer asked him why he didn't rescue James bleeding on the railway lines, he replied, quote, "'Cause blood stains, doesn't it? And then me mother would have to pay more money." End of quote. Robert's mother had no illusions about her son. Quote, "He's a little liar, he's devious, he's a scally, he robs, he plays truant." She had, end of quote, she had only one illusion, quote unquote, "but he's not a murderer." Jon Venables' family was not rich, but he was not as close to poverty as Robert's family. For a start, there were only 3 children. John was the middle one. He had an elder brother aged 13 and a 9-year-old sister. His father, Neil, an unemployed panel beater, was separated from his mother, but they lived only 1 mile apart. They saw each other every other day and took equal care of the children. John spent Sunday to Thursday with his mom and the rest of the week, and the rest of every week with his dad. His mother, Susan, aged 36 at the time, was the hard one. John was afraid of her. When he played truant, he was scared she would come home and find him. And in Lower Lane police station, when he was being questioned about the murder, she had to be told that her harsh words were inhibiting him from confessing. Quote, "You'd better tell the truth. I'm warning you," she would say. His father was much more gentle. Neil Venables regarded himself as a film buff with a passion for horror. He frequented local cinemas and regularly hired videos for the night. During the James Bulger investigation, police checked the details of 50 videos Neil hired in recent months. Among the list were several horror films, including one video in which the police took special interest in, Child's Play 3, a film which carries the line, "Children are consumer trainees." It's about a good guy doll invaded by a spirit of a mass murderer who kills people in gruesome ways. I mean, I guess you can kind of draw some parallels between the film's plot and James Bulger's death. The final scene takes place among the tracks of a funfair ghost train where the doll, which resembles an infant with spiky hair, has his face slashed before he's cut to pieces by a ventilator fan. It's not known whether the boy watched any of his father's adult movies. One of the focal points of the local community was QD videos at the bottom of Robert Street, where the kids would browse through the horror stacks discussing their favorites knowledgeably. John was the child who caused his parents the least anxiety. When social workers came around, they came to see his sister and his brother, who had learning difficulties and was receiving special education. He was also given respite care, which is a 6 weekly weekend breaks to relieve the family of the burden of looking after him. At school, John was considered bright enough, even though he had trouble keeping up with lessons. He would often have to stay in class at break times to catch up. He used to be bullied by other children for being so behind and would return home at night visibly upset. In John's case, hyperactivity went beyond fidgeting into outbursts of sudden anger and violence. At his first primary school, the headmistress referred him to a psychologist, noting how he used to bang his head against the classroom wall to gain attention. He would throw things at other children, cut himself deliberately with scissors, and stick paper all over his face. Other parents came in to complain about attention seeking. He was most likely bullied. One neighbor said she always let him into her home whenever his mother was out. Quote, "He always seemed perfectly well behaved, and I think he looked on me as some kind of grandma. He once came to me crying, saying the other boys were picking on him, trying to steal his bike." End of quote. But his outbursts of anger grew worse, and he was suspended for trying to choke a boy with a ruler. John had to be pulled off the boy, who had gone red in the face, by a teacher who described the incident as the worst case of school violence she had witnessed. As a result of the incident, John's mother decided to move him to another school. John's first year after he was moved was relatively successful, but his progress took a downturn in September 1991 when he was transferred into another class. Sitting in the new class was a chubby boy with a cherub's face, Robert Thompson. Neil Venables was warned by friends not to let his son play with the other boy. "Keep them apart or he'll get into trouble," they said. "I didn't know it would be like this," Mr. Venables said with hindsight. From the start, John was drawn and repulsed by Robert, like opposite and equal poles of a magnet. He was repulsed because he found Robert's contempt for authority quite scary. I sat away from him. He caused trouble, John said. But curiosity drew him towards Robert in equal measure, and there were rewards for breaking the rules. Robert would give John presents of stolen objects, trolls, toy terrapins, sweets. Once, Robert shared with him a tin of Rosie's chocolates, which he poured secretly into his coat pocket. Robert ate too many and he actually felt sick. In return, John would let Robert ride his bicycle, and from time to time he would suggest naughty deeds himself. Sometimes I told Robbie to do things, so he does, he told the police officer with pride in his voice. John liked to spend his playtime in fairly quiet ways. He was too scared to be naughty on his own. On Sundays he used to watch Thunderbirds. Lady Penelope was his favorite character because she was rich, followed by Brains with the glasses. Robert hated Thunderbirds because of the puppets' stringy thingies. He liked to spend the weekend on the streets. After they became friends, he initiated John into the joys of climbing into people's back gardens and the thrill of being chased out by the owners. He also liked to scare old ladies by jumping out in front of their noses. Robert always wanted to stay out late, and he encouraged John to join him. One day they stayed out until 10:30 p.m. and John received a severe punishment from his mother. They would hang around the video shop in Walton village, where the shop girl was pleased to have their company. Best of all, they would spend time on the Walton railway line, where Robert built a den close to the bridge. When Robert was asked what his hobby was, he said skipping school. Truanting or sagging off became a way of life for Robert. In the autumn term of 1992, Robert played truant for 49 half days and John for 40. Between January and the day of the murder, Robert had taken 37 half days out of a possible 60. He just didn't want to be at school, and there was no corporal punishment or other form of penalty that touched him. His mom said she was so often called to Walton police station to retrieve her son that they should have given her a job there. They would say, "Take your son home." I said, "No. See that cell? Lock him in it." Jon Venables said the class teacher tried to keep Robert in school by offering him a prize for a week's continuous attendance. He did, but the prize never came. Sometimes Robert would go off on his own, but it was more fun with a friend. The first time that he asked John to skip school with him was September the previous year, only weeks after they became friends. Robert had asked John before, but John very rarely skipped school in the previous school he's been in. He was scared, and so he said no. But this time, curiosity took the upper hand. Quote, "I wanted to see what it was like," he said. "It was good," end of quote. They went off in the afternoon and walked around the shops in County Road near Walton. By chance, the rest of John's family was driving past and spotted them. John's dad ran out of the car and grabbed him while Robert ran off down the street laughing and shouting, "You can't catch me." The experience gave John new confidence, and the second time they ran off together, he was the one that suggested it. In all, they played truant 4 times. They would sneak out during the morning break, hiding behind the wall before the coast was clear. Then they would hide their school satchels under a subway and set off on their adventure. Most of the fun revolved around shoplifting, sweets, trolls, pepperami, tins of modeling paint, drinks, candles, anything really. Or they would just mess around in shops, playing on computer games if Robert had his way, or sliding on the polished floors if John had his way. Once they went into a home decoration shop and hid under a pile of carpets. Another time they asked a salesgirl if she stocked fishy knickers. When shopkeepers asked what they were doing, they would pretend that they were waiting for their mom, and usually they were kicked out of the stores. One time they skipped school with Robert's younger brother, which went extremely wrong. They were in the Strand Shopping Centre in Bootle when the brother wandered off. They had to report him missing at the security office before he was found, and John's mother was very angry. Maybe it was this incident that put the idea into John or Robert's head to get a little boy lost. When John left home on the morning of Friday, February 12th, he was happy because it was the last day of school before a week's holiday and he was going to take some pet gerbils home. But just as he was entering the school gates, he met John and they decided to skip school together for the fourth and final time. The first time that Susan Venables knew they had stayed away from school was when she saw one of John's classmates on her way home with the gerbils. Susan walked around the area for hours searching for John. She even shouted up to the railway tracks at Walton where she knew that Robert had a den. Quote, "I couldn't hear anything," she said. This would have been at about 5:30 p.m., just the time the boys were about to begin killing James. It was very dark and I shouted his name. That's the thing that upsets me, because obviously where I was standing, poor little James must have been not far." End of quote. By then, Robert and John had abducted James Bulger from the Strand and attempted to drown him in the nearby canal. Then they had carried, dragged and kicked him along a 2.5-mile journey, at times swinging him violently in the air or dropping him against the road until they reached the railway, where they threw paint in his face, stoned him with bricks, bashed his head with a 22-pound iron bar and left him dead across the tracks to be cut in half by a passing goods train. In the interviews with the two boys, psychiatrists could find no clues to why the boys acted so violently. The police have uncovered no evidence of any abuse within either family. Apart from John's incident with the ruler, there had been no record of previous violence. Then there were the separated parents, the poverty, the truanting, the videos. But that is the common lot of thousands of 10-year-olds who have not turned into murderers. Only two people can answer the question, and even their ability is doubtful. Since the murder, Robert has been in a state of post-traumatic shock, haunted by nightmares and flashbacks from the railway tracks. John breaks into hysteria whenever the subject is mentioned. His parents say that he is broken-hearted. Okay, I mean, do I feel sorry for them too? No, not in the slightest. They knew exactly what they were doing when they did it. I don't care about all the post-traumatic shock, the nightmares, the flashback, hysteria, broken hearts. I couldn't care less. At the end of the day, the people who had the most trauma, broken hearts and complete shock were not only James, but James's family, James's brothers, the whole community. Most of all, James died a terrifying death. He was only 2 years old. He was a baby, and to the end, his last words were, "I want my mom." Just imagine how scared, how petrified he must have been, and he kept getting back up after being hit so many times until he received the final blow to his head with the iron bar and he couldn't get up no more. And even worse than that, he was left on the railway track to be run over by a train so that they can cover their tracks. I have no sympathy whatsoever for these cold-blooded murderers. A lot of professionals out there will try to find a psychological reason, some trauma in their childhood which broke them and they had an underlying mental issue to do what they did. Others will try to blame their parents' separation, the poverty, the area, the movies that they were watching. But in the end, the fact remains that these are evil children, and witnesses who saw them with James along the 3-mile way did nothing. Adults who stood by watched violence and they just moved on. And then they were sorry. After James was murdered, they were sorry. Superintendent Albert Kirby, who headed the investigation, doesn't believe in the underbelly of Liverpool nonsense or stuff about the disintegration of modern society, the collapse of the 90 cities. He is an old-fashioned crime and punishment man. He believes that these were evil boys. One investigating police officer said, quote, "You could look into the eyes of Robert and knew you were looking at evil." End of quote. Superintendent Kirby is a religious man. A psychoanalyst and child psychotherapist comes up with yet another possible explanation. Quote, "I think it has something to do with a hatred of vulnerability and babiness in themselves which they projected onto this toddler. If in their own lives they have had it extremely tough and been bullied and neglected and abused, then they end up rapidly having to prove themselves to be extremely tough and invulnerable. A bit like Arnold Schwarzenegger in The Terminator. There he is terrorizing a girl. He appears to be a normal human, but inside the soft flesh there is indestructible metal. Kids fantasize about such things." End of quote. I'm sorry, but you compare an actor in a movie role who is acting and his character is the Terminator. How on earth can you even compare them? It's a character in a movie, it's not real. What John and Robert did is real. The amazing psychoanalyst carries on saying, quote, "In this state, it is quite painful to see a normal relationship between mother and child. There is hatred and envy directed at the baby, a wish to see it suffer in the way they have suffered. They probably weren't out to kill someone, but they were probably out to ruin someone else's happiness. Are they mad? I don't think so. From their point of view, it makes perfect sense." End of quote. It's unbelievable, really, what this person is saying. They weren't out to kill someone? Oh yes, they were. It was all planned. On that Friday, 12th of February 1993, both John and Robert went into the Strand with the sole intention to kidnap a small child, and the intention was to drown him in the canal. So how can you say that they weren't out to kill someone? This was premeditated, this was planned, this was executed, attempted to be staged as an accident, and then denying it ever happened and pointing the blame at each other. And these were 10-year-old children. It can't get any more horrendous than this. The closest either boy came to offering any kind of explanation was when John was asked by police why he had taken James's shoe off by the railway tracks. "I don't know," he replied, "just mad, just something to do." End of quote. Yeah, just out of boredom, let's go ahead and kill a 2-year-old baby because we are so bored. On 18th of February 1993 at 7 a.m., just 6 days after the murder of James Bulger, a team of detectives is dispatched to arrest Jon Venables. They went to the home address they had from school. His father was there and said that John wasn't at the house. He was actually at his mom's house in Norris Green. Police then visited his mom's house and they soon noticed John, a small boy, at the top of the stairs. They had to let him know that he needs to be taken to Lower Lane police station where he will be questioned. He was asked if he still had the jacket that he was wearing on Friday. During his interview, John said some really odd things and even asked if the police will be talking to Robert. A second team of detectives is dispatched to arrest Robert Thompson. After his mom opened the door, one of the police constables spotted Robert, his eyes looking just about everywhere, but never once was he in fear. He was told he will need to get down to the police station for questioning, and that's when he started crying.
A week ago today, little James Bulger disappeared while shopping with his mother in the Bootle Strand Shopping Precinct. 2 youths were seen walking him away. His body was found 2 days later on a railway line in Walton near Liverpool. Today the police investigating the murder announced a breakthrough in their inquiries.
Following the abduction of James Bulger, from the New Strand Shopping Precinct in Bootle on Friday the 12th of February 1993 and the subsequent findings of his body on the railway line in Walton on Sunday the 14th of February, 2 boys aged 10 years from Walton area have been arrested and are currently being interviewed by Merseyside police at police stations on Merseyside. It is stressed that the boys are currently being interviewed in relation to these matters. At this stage, it is not known if charges will follow.
Today's announcement came after hundreds of calls to the incident room overnight following the first screening on television last night of an enhanced video photograph of the 2 youths seen with James. It can no longer be shown for legal reasons. More than 40 names were generated, but 3 kept cropping up, police said. However, one report says the arrests of the 2 10-year-olds were actually made yesterday morning in secret. Police apparently keen to avoid the disturbances earlier this week when a 12-year-old boy was questioned, then eliminated from inquiries. At lunchtime, Superintendent Kirby was asked whether it was possible that 10-year-olds would appear in court facing a charge of murder.
Yes, I think in all probability that will be the obvious final outcome. I'm still waiting now to speak with the Crown Prosecution Service and other legal representatives to find exactly what course of action we will have to be taking.
The law relating to children differs from that for adults. 10 is the youngest age at which a child can be charged with any crime in England and Wales. In Scotland, it's 8. Below such an age, the law considers children unaware of the consequences of their actions. Even between the age of 10 and 14, the prosecution must still prove knowledge of serious wrongdoing. If convicted, the child can be detained at a special treatment centre for an indeterminate time. Lawyers say the presence of a guardian during interview is an important safeguard.
A child should be always accompanied by a responsible adult to ensure that the interviewing, for example, is carried out fairly and correctly, and perhaps to make any objections to questions which an adult could make for himself.
The law makes special arrangements aimed at protecting children's rights. Under the 1984 Police and Criminal Evidence Act, a child must be accompanied by an appropriate adult, such as a parent, guardian or social worker, during questioning in police custody. That person can advise the child on answering questions, and any statements would have to be signed by him or her. The child also has the right to free legal advice. Police can detain the child overnight, but normally he or she would be put in a secure home under the care of social services.
The main problem that police face is that children are very suggestible. This means that the police must be very careful not to lead them. On the other hand, if they do not lead children in their questioning, the children very often don't give an answer at all. This means that when the case comes to court and the jury see or read what the children have said to the police officers, they very often place no reliance at all upon that evidence because they know how suggestible children actually are.
Tonight in Liverpool, a special memorial service is to be held for James Bulger. Not since the Hillsborough disaster has the city seen such a collective feeling of grief.
The officers and detectives could not believe that these 2 small children could have done something as horrific as this. Little children to cause so much suffering. Robert and John are taken to separate police stations to be interviewed. Even though they were both arrested at 7 a.m., they were only interviewed at around 5 p.m. As soon as they got into the police station, Jon Venables' mother said that he will say he wasn't even at the Strand. But police knew already that he'd been there. They knew both of the boys were together in the Strand. They already knew that they had the children who abducted 2-year-old baby James. Obviously, whilst in police custody, both Robert and John denied murder. Nothing new there. During this time, Police get even more information. This time it came from a shop formerly known as Bradford and Bingley Building Society. The manager reported that on 12th of February he saw two boys hanging about by the door and they had their fingers all over the windows, so naturally the detectives took fingerprints of the windows and not surprisingly they were able to match them immediately to Jon Venables. They could now place him in the Strand. Robert Thompson, on the other hand, admitted quite early on in the interview that both of them were in the Strand. They both saw James and his mother. As they were going up the escalators, James and his mom were coming through the doors. Robert said that James was running around the shop when Jon told him, "Come here." He then grabbed his hand and walked out of the Strand by the Marks and Spencer shop by the Canal Bridge. We need to remember that Robert was street smart. He was quite clever. He'd been skipping school often and would wander about the streets. So he knew the area, the ins and outs and the spaces around him. Robert pointed out that perhaps Jon got James to follow behind them, but they lost James somewhere, which I find very odd, especially considering the amount of details that he's giving, yet the most important thing, he doesn't really know where they presumably lost James. It's not really adding up though, is it? Even though Robert tried really hard not to incriminate himself while he was speaking to the interrogators, he failed when he gave a detailed account of what James Bulger had been wearing on the day that he was killed. The police knew that only the killer would be able to remember so much detail. Jon Venables is being interviewed 3 miles away from Robert at Lower Lane police station, and he carries on saying that he wasn't at the Strand. But by this point, police already know from Robert that this is just not true. So they confront Jon about it, telling him what Robert had said. Eventually, Jon Venables sleeps. And this is a major sleep, and it just goes to show that no matter how hard these kids try to hide the fact that they killed James and try to manipulate the police into believing them, lying about being at the shopping center, in the end they are still kids. And you know how kids are like. Once you grill them enough, they get caught in the lie. After Jon says that the boys didn't do anything, he sleeps, saying it was Robert's idea to kill James. I honestly can't believe that I'm saying this considering his age. He was only 10 years old, but Robert Thompson was very calculated during the police interviews. Whenever there was an awkward situation during the interview, he would just cry. He was given a Mars bar and a Coke, but the odd thing was that when he cried, there were no tears. He was trying to manipulate the police officer interrogating him. He thought that he was going home. He even said at one point in the interview room that if he wanted to kill a baby, he would have killed his own, referring to his younger stepbrother. There was a pattern emerging there, you know, of desperate lying, trying to talk about anything else apart from this, apart from the murder of James. He believed that he was working the police. Jon Venables in the interview was quite scared of upsetting his mother. Susan Venables started shouting at him, and at one point the police had to tell her to stop doing that as she won't be helping him open up. The police took her aside and told her she should let Jon know that they love him no matter of what happened and they support him, but he needs to tell the truth. So Susan listens to the officers and tells Jon to just tell the truth. She changes her tone, and this made all the difference to Jon. He confesses to killing James.
He said that the two of you were in the Strand and that you saw the little boy.
We never.
Is that the God's honest truth?
God's honest truth, I'm telling you that we never. He was too scared. He was probably too scared.
And he said that you took him by the hand and led him out of the Strand shops.
We never. He's a liar.
Calm down. Oh my gosh.
Alright, come on, look. It's alright, come on, alright.
I never got the boy. I never killed him, Mum. Yeah, we was, but we never saw any kids there. We never got any kids.
So you were in Bootle New Strand?
Was you in Bootle Strand?
Yeah, but we never got a kid, Mum. We never got a
Mrs. Venables, would you... I must ask you not to get angry with it. A short while ago, as is detailed on your custody record out there, you had a conversation with your mum and you then requested that myself and Dave Tanner come into the room. Is that right? Yeah. And what was it you told us?
That I killed James. He took him on the railway shop and started throwing bricks at him.
Why did he throw bricks at him?
No.
Did it make him fall over?
No.
So you're saying he threw the same house brick at him, full in the face, and he didn't fall over?
Yeah, he did fall over. And he just kept on getting back up again. He wouldn't stay down.
What was he saying while he was doing all this?
He was saying stay down, you stupid David and all that.
Why did he want him to stay down?
I don't know. He wanted him dead, probably. So we walked up to him and we were walking around with him and I took his hand.
Well, whose idea was it to walk towards him?
Mine.
Was it? What did
Then
you
it
say?
was Robert's idea to kill him. And we went outside to the canal.
What for?
Don't know, he said let's throw him in the water. He was persuading him, he said kneel down and let's look at the water and all that, but he wouldn't. Because when we wouldn't get him down, Robert kicked him up and threw him on the floor and that's where he got his bump on his head.
Who took hold of him?
Robert. He was dragging him along the road where the security camera was.
Where'd you go with him after that?
The reservoir where that orange spotted us.
Is young James walking with you by this time, or are you still having to pull him?
And he was walking with us.
Was he upset, or had he made friends with you?
He was alright.
No, you know these video films, don't you? I went too fast for you, right? You know these videos, these video cameras?
They're plugged onto the ceiling.
Correct. And they look down on everything that goes on in the Strand, don't they? You shaking your head, see?
Yeah.
I know the truth. I believe I know the truth.
I was there.
That's right.
You waved.
Correct, but I know that a lot of things that have gone on.
Yeah, well, do you know it was me that killed him? It wasn't. I never even killed him.
What time was that? When was that?
I don't know.
So what did
What happened?
Don't know. He grabbed the baby's hand and just walked around the Strand. And then he let him go loose then.
Did he?
When we were by the church, he let him go.
And you were with John then? You shaking your head? You shaking your head?
Yeah. I told him to take him back.
You did what?
Told him to take him back.
You told him to take it
I
back?
don't know.
All right, Bobby. No, you're not getting all the blame. We're just asking your son. We're trying to find the truth.
We always get the blame.
Wait a minute, Bobby. Listen. Just calm yourself down for a minute, okay? You alright?
Yeah. He said he wants us more.
So what did you say to him?
What did you say?
You?
We're going to try and find us, Mum.
Where did you leave him then?
On a reservoir place.
I don't believe you would have left him there. You took him away from where the reservoir is and walked down somewhere else.
Where?
Going towards the police station.
I never killed him. you're saying that I've got blood and you think it's off baby James.
Correct.
Is that what you think? It's not the truth. Did he
Grab hold of James.
I don't know.
You don't know?
He might have made them follow on behind us
Did he?
and then got him lost somewhere.
Were you with him then?
When?
With John when that happened?
No.
Why won't you tell us?
What?
Why won't you tell us?
I never even killed him.
Bobby?
What?
Come on now.
You'll be over in a few minutes if you just tell him the truth.
James threw a brick in his face. I don't know.
Right. Try and stop. Right. We're getting there, aren't we? We're getting to the truth now.
Yeah, well, I'm going to end up getting out the plane because I've got blood on me.
John soon said, I did kill him. What about his mom? Will you tell her I'm sorry? According to him, together with Robert and James, they went outside to the canal. John and Robert just wanted to throw James into the water. Robert was persuading James to kneel down and look at the water in an attempt to distract him and then push him, but James didn't do it. And when they couldn't get James down, Robert got really angry with him, so he picked him up and threw him on the ground. That's how James got a bump on his head. The boys then walked James past Queen's Drive, past Christ's Church, and took him on the reservoir. They walked him to the reservoir so that they can get him to Walton village, and they walked along to the train track. They get to the railway track and they start throwing bricks at James in his face, on his head, on his body. Jon Venables tried really hard to remove himself from all of the violent actions, blaming Robert Thompson, even saying that he only hit James a few times and it was only because Robert asked him to, but he said that he didn't do it really hard. And when Robert asked him to throw bricks at James, he didn't hit James. Instead, he threw the brick next to him. As you can imagine, by this point in their interviews, they both started blaming each other. Robert said it was John who threw a brick in James's face. The hell that poor baby James went through is just unbelievable. Each time that James was hit and kicked, after falling to the ground, he would get back up, and he kept getting back up. John said that Robert told James to just stay down because he probably wanted him dead. Both boys splashed stolen blue paint into James's eyes. They then bludgeoned him with bricks and stones, kicked his battered body and shoved batteries into his mouth. Finally, they hit James over the head with a 22-pound iron bar. That blow alone caused 10 skull fractures. The stones being thrown hit James in the head. The iron bar knocked James out onto the railway track. That was the last time James Bulger would be knocked on the ground. He never got back up. James lost his life. By the time James was dead, he had sustained 42 brutal injuries in total. The baby's heartbreaking final words were, "I want my mom." After murdering James, Robert and John placed his body on the railway track in an attempt to make his death look accidental. Even though a train came and severed James's body in two, it was obvious that his demise was no accident. His body would be found 2 days later. Jon Venables blamed Robert Thompson for everything, and that was the story, and it never changed. At this point, police had everything that they needed. They had confessions, they had evidence. 10-year-old John and 10-year-old Robert murdered James Bulger on 12th of February 1993. After questioning Robert Thompson and Jon Venables, Detective Phil Roberts said, quote, "As far as I'm concerned, that day I stared evil in the face. They were a match made in hell, a freak of nature. They went out that day to kill. I truly believe that. And if they hadn't been caught, I fear they would have struck again. End of quote. We will never know exactly what happened when James was killed, but one thing we do know is that 2-year-old James was brutally murdered by 2 monster children. On 20th of February 1993, John and Robert are charged with James's murder, the youngest kids to face murder charges in the UK for over 100 years. 10 days after the murder, on 22nd of February 1993, the 2 boys appear at South Sefton Magistrates Court in Bootle to face their charges. They plead not guilty. A crowd of 300 people gather outside, and as the vans leave, a riot breaks out. This time the vans are decoys, but it raises questions. What would have happened if the crowd had got hold of one of the defendants? The authorities, having underestimated the public's anger, relocate the trial to Preston. The first time that the boys set eyes on each other after they were arrested was in Preston Crown Court on 1st of November 1993, where they stood trial. They occasionally looked at each other, but when the court was played John's taped descriptions of how they had truanted, they simultaneously smiled. Every day the public gallery was packed with students, pensioners, mothers, teenagers, all drawn to the courtroom. The mayor of Preston accused them of being sick people, but still they came, queuing up for tickets 2 hours before proceedings began. The Swedes, French, Germans, Canadians and Americans had all come to gaze at Liverpool's child killers. The Americans fed 1.5 minutes of the James Bulger story into a 22-minute bulletin of national and international news. Quote, America is the land of shopping malls. This story has no borders, end of quote. NBC correspondent Denise Murphy said. A newspaper man from Detroit said it was because Liverpool is the Beatles and love, love, love. Heck, we don't even have murderers that young in New York. At Radio City in Liverpool, the calls were coming through from Australia, New Zealand and Canada. A newsroom reporter who was not working on the case refused transatlantic interview demands, saying that it was not enough that he had a Liverpool accent. Reporters from around the world ended up in the streets of Walton, getting interviews of any 10-year-old boys hanging around in the streets. After a while, the 10-year-olds began to charge a tenner an interview. I couldn't be arsed talking about them, said one. They were just your average scruff, like the rest of us. Inside the court sat the 2 boys, so little that you could barely see them at the desk. After a while, they became used to it. They looked, moved, fidgeted, scratched, cried, even sucked their thumbs, just like any 11-year-olds. Even though both boys killed James, Detective Phil Roberts believed that Robert Thompson was in charge, and he wasn't the only one believing that. During the murder trial in November 1993, Robert was depicted as the leader and John the follower. This was largely due to the fact that John appeared more emotional while Robert often appeared chillingly unfazed. Meanwhile, court-appointed psychiatrists said that both Robert Thompson and Jon Venables knew the difference between right and wrong. They also said that neither boy was a sociopath. However, the psychiatrists were not able to find a motive for this horrific crime. To this day, the motive still remains unclear. A special platform is built to allow the defendants to see above the railings. Denise and Ralph Bulger announce that they are expecting another baby, but Denise refuses to go to court. She's vehement, she won't sit in the same vicinity as James's killers. To this day, there are still certain details of the case that she's unaware of. Crucially, the boys have now reached the age of 11 and are old enough to be convicted of murder. However, the jury needs to believe that both boys understand the seriousness of their crimes. To hide the identity of both boys, they are referred to during the trial as Child A and Child B. An injunction prevents the press from releasing any details about them. It emerges that on 12th of February 1993, at around 12:30 p.m., the boys had tried to abduct another little boy from the same shopping precinct. The mother spotted her son and daughter playing with two boys. While paying for her shopping, she realized that her son was missing. As she ran outside, she saw the same two boys beckoning her son to follow them. Screaming his name, her son returned. During the trial, she remembers overhearing Thompson and Venables say, "We'll take one of those." Jon Venables mentioned in his police interview it was their intention to find the child and throw them into the path of an oncoming bus or taxi in the road outside the shopping center. They wanted the death to look like an accident. This is a horrifying revelation and at the same time a triumph for the prosecution. During the abduction of James Bulger, the pair took him on a 2.5-mile walk of the city. It would take just over 1 hour and 15 minutes to complete. 38 witnesses are called to the stand to reveal what they saw at the various stages of James's final journey. Of course, that some of these witnesses, as I mentioned earlier, on the day decided to do absolutely nothing to help James. The prosecution wants to make it clear to the jury that they don't need to rely on Thompson and Venables' version of events. One witness, Malcolm Walton, says he'd seen a child matching James's description near the Leeds and Liverpool Canal that looked to be in a distressed state. Another, Irene Hitman, who was taking her dog for a walk close to her home in Breeze Hill, also saw the same boy at about 4:40 p.m. She said that the boy looked to be frightened with large lumps on his head. She told Robert Thompson and Jon Venables to take the boy home, but that wasn't their intention. Many of the witnesses noticed that the boy was distressed, but all seemed to have assumed that he was in the care of an older brother or brothers. Some witnesses said that James was crying and extremely distressed, some that he was laughing. Several witnesses noticed injuries to his head, a mark on the forehead and a bump on the right side, another bump on the top of the head, a graze on the face, a red mark on the cheek. Many said that the little boy was held by the two older boys, one on each side, by his arms or his hands. One said they were dragging him and claimed that one of the boys kicked him in the ribs. Not a full-blooded kick, but one of persuasion. And yet, another said the two boys swung the child up as if in rough play. At one point, a woman saw a boy take hold of the little boy by the shoulders and shake him briskly. One woman who asked if the older boys knew the toddler was told they had just found him and were taking him to a police station. But later, approached by a school friend, one defendant said that the little boy was the other's brother. There were further sightings of James, Robert and John near the railway line about 2 hours after James's abduction. A man who saw them in an entry to a railway bridge heard one of the older boys say, "I'm fed up having my little brother. He's always the same. I'm not bringing him again." Witness Hage, a 15-year-old girl, said that at 5:20 p.m. on 12th of February, she saw a toddler with two older boys. They were yards from Walton Lane police station at the foot of the railway embankment. She watched them for only 10 seconds before she walked on. The child was being pushed towards the road. He was laughing, Hage said. One of the older boys was climbing toward the embankment, the other apparently following with the infant in his arms. It seems that witness Hage was the last person to see James alive. Allegedly, the boys also threw James over a bridge just to see how he would land and the noise he would make when he would hit the rocks. The witnesses all blame themselves for not interfering, and quite honestly, I blame them as well. I don't blame the 15-year-old girl, but I do blame all the adults. I'm not going to sugarcoat something which shouldn't be sugarcoated. Now comes the most horrific part of James Bulger murder, the autopsy report. James Bulger's killers inflicted 42 injuries on the 2-year-old. He had multiple fractures to the skull and the right side was shattered. Dr. Alan Williams counted 22 bruises, splits and grazes on James's face and head, and 20 more wounds on his body. Dr. Williams said that post-mortem examinations revealed that James had been struck by at least 30 blows, and he had experienced a short period of survival after the attack. It may only have been minutes, Dr. Williams said on the 7th day of the trial. James was dead before a train severed his body. Dr. Williams speculated on how James suffered so many injuries, so many that none could be isolated as the fatal blow. The deep bruising, the cut on his forehead down to the skull, and the damage to the back of the head, together with many other injuries, suggested bricks and an iron bar had been used, Dr. Williams said. The court had admitted as exhibits a catalogue of debris found around the body, a box of 27 bricks, a blood-stained stone found near a child's scarf, his underpants, and an iron bar. Dr. Williams spent 33 minutes describing the external injuries suffered by James. Many to his legs had been inflicted when he was naked. The prosecution claimed the killers stripped him from the waist down. It's also claimed that a grotesque indecency was inflicted on James. The foreskin of his penis was pulled back. Many of the injuries covered an area of less than 1 square inch, but others were massive. Dr. Williams traced the lines of skull fractures from the jaw over the forehead across virtually all of the skull. Brain damage was extensive, including a hemorrhage at the center. One other implement was responsible for James's suffering. Injury number 13 was bruising to the area around the right cheek and ear. It was a severe blow which Dr. Williams said left a pattern, a grooved mark. It was probably caused by stamping or kicking. The court was also told that among the mourners laying flowers at the scene of James Bulger's murder was one of his alleged killers. Robert Thompson joined a neighbor who went to the railway embankment 3 days after the discovery of the child's body. Quote, "I laid my flowers and he walked away, looking at the other flowers." End of quote. Brenda Jeremy, 47 years old at the time, said in a statement read to the jury. The forensic evidence submitted to the jury is vital. Graham Jackson, a Home Office forensic scientist, matched blood samples from James to the blood found on Charles B. shoe, who we now know to be Jon Venables. There was a 1 in a billion chance of it being an error. Philip Rydyard, another forensic scientist, was able to match the pattern of bruising on James's right cheek with features of the upper part of a shoe worn by child A, which is now known to be Robert Thompson. The shoes were removed without Robert untying the laces, so the police was able to take imprints of the laces and the rings. They were black brogues that had distinctive stitching and an unusual arrangement of lacing rings. Light blue paint marks had been discovered on James's anorak, hair, shoes and underpants. The same light blue paint marks were also found on Robert and John's clothing, including their jackets, trousers and shoes. Andy Mully, a forensic scientist, pointed out to the jury that a paint mark on John's sleeve might well have been James's small handprint. Despite their strong evidence, the police are concerned that the jury will only return a verdict of manslaughter. The fact that the jury needs to be sure the boys know the severity of their crimes is troubling the police, especially Detective Superintendent Albert Kirby. After hearing 3 weeks of evidence, the jury are asked to deliver their verdict. On 24th of November 1993, taking just 6 hours, the jury find both Robert Thompson and Jon Venables guilty of murder. Mr. Justice Morland sentences them to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure. On November 24th, 1993, Robert Thompson and Jon Venables were found guilty of the abduction and murder of James Bulger, making them the youngest convicted killers in modern British history. But you would think that considering the seriousness of the crime, they would spend their lives in prison, right? That's what you would expect, right? But you are so wrong. They were indefinitely sentenced to detention at Her Majesty's pleasure. Her Majesty's pleasure term is used to describe detention in prison for an indefinite length of time. A judge may rule that a person be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure for serious offences or based on a successful insanity defense. This is sometimes used where there is a great risk of reoffending. However, it's most often used for juvenile offenders, usually as a substitute for life sentencing, which might be much longer for younger offenders. For example, Section 90 of the United Kingdom's Powers of Criminal Courts Sentencing Act 2000, which only extends to England and Wales, states, where a person convicted of murder or any other offence, the sentence for which is fixed by law as life imprisonment appears to the court to have been aged under 18 at the time the offence was committed, the court shall, notwithstanding anything in this or any other act, sentence him to be detained during Her Majesty's pleasure. Prisoners held at Her Majesty's pleasure are periodically reviewed to determine whether their sentence can be deemed complete. Although this power traditionally rested with the monarch, such reviews are now made by others. The Secretary of State for Justice in England and Wales, for instance. Minimum terms are also set before which the prisoner cannot be released. In England and Wales, these were originally set by the Home Secretary, but since 30th of November 2000 have been set by the trial judge. Prisoner sentences are typically deemed to be complete when the reviewing body is satisfied that there has been a significant change in the offender's attitude and behavior. So both boys were ordered to be imprisoned until review when they turned 18. So they only got 8 years for the murder of James Bulger. Shortly after the trial and after the judge recommended a minimum sentence of 8 years, Lord Taylor of Gosforth, the Lord Chief Justice, recommended that the two boys should serve a minimum of 10 years, which would have made them eligible for release in February 2003 at the age of 20. The editors of The Sun handed a petition bearing nearly 280,000 signatures to Michael Howard, the then Home Secretary, in a bid to increase the time spent by both boys in custody. This campaign was successful, and Howard announced in July 1994 that the boys would be kept in custody for a minimum of 15 years, meaning that they would not be considered for release until February 2008, by which time they would be 25 years old. Lord Donaldson criticized Howard's intervention, describing the increased tariff institutionalized vengeance by a politician playing to the gallery. The increased minimum term was overturned in 1997 by the House of Lords that ruled it unlawful for the Home Secretary to decide on minimum sentences for young offenders. The High Court of Justice and European Court of Human Rights have since ruled that although the Parliament may set minimum and maximum terms for individual categories of crime, it is the responsibility of the trial judge, with the benefit of all the evidence and argument from both prosecution and defense counsel, to determine the minimum term in individual criminal cases. Tony Blair, then Shadow Home Secretary, gave a speech in Wellingborough during which he said, "We hear of crimes so horrific they provoke anger and disbelief in equal proportions. These are the ugly manifestations of a society that is becoming unworthy of that name. Prime Minister John Major said that society needs to condemn a little more and understand a little less. The trial judge, Mr. Justice Morland, stated that exposure to violent videos might have encouraged the actions of Thompson and Venables. This was disputed by David McLean, the Minister of State at the Home Office at the time, who said that police had found no evidence linking the case with video nasties. Some British tabloid newspapers claimed that the attack on James Bulger was inspired by the film Child's Play 3 and campaigned for the rules on video nasties to be tightened. During the police investigation, it emerged that Child's Play 3 was one of the films that Venables' father had rented in the months prior to the killing, but it was not established that Venables had ever watched it. One scene in the film shows the malevolent doll Chucky being splashed with blue paint during a paintball game. A Merseyside detective said, quote, "We went through something like 200 titles rented by the Venables family. There were some you or I wouldn't want to see, but nothing, no scene or plot or dialogue where you could put your finger on the freeze button and say that influenced a boy to go out and commit murder." End of quote. Inspector Ray Simpson of Merseyside Police commented, quote, "If you are going to link this murder to a film, you might as well link it to the railway children." End of quote. The Criminal Justice and Public Order Act 1994 clarified the rules on the availability of certain types of video material to children. I mean, quite honestly, I watched Chucky and it completely shattered my childhood, but I didn't get inspired by watching it to go and kill someone, so I don't know if that is a very plausible argument. After the trial, Robert Thompson was held at the Barton Moss Secure Care Centre in Manchester. John Venables was detained in Vardy House, a small 8-bedded unit at Red Bank Secure Unit in St Helens on Merseyside. These locations were not publicly known until after the boys' release. Details of the boys' lives were recorded twice daily on running sheets and signed by the member of staff who had written them. The records were stored at the units and copied to officials in Whitehall. The boys were taught to conceal their real names and the crime they had committed, which resulted in their being in the units. John Venables' parents regularly visited their son at Red Bank, just as Robert Thompson's mother did, every 3 days at Barton Moss. Despite initial problems, John Venables was said to have eventually made good progress at Red Bank, resulting him in being kept there for the full 8 years, despite the facility only being a short-stay remand unit. Both boys were reported to suffer post-traumatic stress disorder, and John Venables in particular told of experiencing nightmares and flashbacks of the murder. This is just astounding to me, really. I have no sympathy whatsoever. I'm gonna repeat that again. In 1999, lawyers for Robert Thompson and John Venables appealed to the European Court of Human Rights that the boys' trial had not been impartial since they were too young to follow proceedings and understand an adult court. The European Court dismissed their claim that the trial was inhumane and degrading treatment, but upheld their claim that they were denied a fair trial by the nature of the court proceedings. They committed adult crime. They should be in adult court. The European Court also held that Howard's intervention had led to a highly charged atmosphere, which resulted in an unfair judgment. On 15th of March 1999, the court in Strasbourg ruled by 14 votes to 5 that there had been a violation of Article 6 of the European Convention on Human Rights regarding the fairness of the trial of Thompson and Venables, stating, "The public trial process in an adult court must be regarded in the case of an 11-year-old child as a severely intimidating procedure." End of quote. In September 1999, James Bulger's parents appealed to the European Court of Human Rights but failed to persuade the court that a victim of a crime has the right to be involved in determining the sentence of the perpetrator. The European Court case led to the new Lord Chief Justice, Lord Wolfe, reviewing the minimum sentence. In October 2000, he recommended the tariff be reduced from 10 to 8 years, adding that Her Majesty's Young Offender Institution was a corrosive atmosphere for the juveniles. In June 2001, after a 6-month review, the parole board ruled the boys were no longer a threat to public safety and could be released, as their minimum tariff had expired in February of that year. The Home Secretary, David Blanket, approved the decision and they were released a few weeks later on lifelong license after serving 8 years. It was reported that both men were given new identities and moved to secret locations under a witness protection style program. This was supported by the fabrication of passports, national insurance numbers, qualification certificates and medical records. Blanket added his own conditions to their license and insisted on being sent daily updates on the men's actions. The terms of their release included the following. They were not allowed to contact each other or James Bulger's family. They were prohibited from visiting the Merseyside region. Curfews may be imposed on them and they must report to probation officers. If they breached the rules or were deemed a risk to the public, they could be returned to prison. An injunction was imposed on the media after the trial, preventing the publication of details about Robert Thompson and Jon Venables. The worldwide injunction was kept in force following their release on parole, so their new identities and locations could not be published. In 2001, Blanket stated, quote, "The injunction was granted because there was a real and strong possibility that their lives would be at risk if their identities became known," end of quote. And honestly, I do not understand why do we need to spend so much money on rehabilitating murderers, protecting their identities, creating new identities like a witness protection style program. It's like you reward them by making sure that no one can recognize them or know who they are now. I just don't get it. I don't understand. In the months after the trial and following the birth of their second son, the marriage of James Bulger's parents, Ralph and Denise, broke down. They divorced in 1995. Denise married Stuart Fergus, with whom she had 2 sons. Ralph also remarried and had 3 daughters by his second wife.
From ITN headquarters, the early evening news with John Suchet.
Hello. The teddy bears he loved so much sat side by side in church today, the day of the funeral of James Bulger. The toys were propped up on a seat that had been specially made for James by his father. It was placed a few inches from James's coffin. They played the music of Michael Jackson. They played too Tears in Heaven. And among the wreaths, a final poem from his parents, ending "Good night and God bless."
A final journey for James Bulger, his infant coffin surrounded by flowers in his memory. Hundreds of people looked on as his father and uncles bore him into the local family church. His life was not lost in vain, they were told, for other children are now benefiting from the generosity shown after his death. Every element of the funeral mass had been selected by his parents, Ralph and Denise, the cameras admitted with their permission.
His death was not in vain. Something in James Patrick has touched the whole world, and we wish that we could turn the clock back 2.5 weeks. We wish we could make things better. We wish so much that we could bring James back.
James's teddy bears, reminders of such a young life lost, sat on the chair his father had made for him. His parents listened as his favourite record was played.
Especially his parents, Denise and Ralph, that they may feel the healing power of Christ in the midst of their pain and grief.
The service was led by both Catholic and Anglican clergy, a symbol of the universal grief felt here. Also in mourning, the detective leading the police investigation.
Let the children come to me. Do not keep them from me. The kingdom of God belongs to such as these.
The Eric Clapton song, Tears in Heaven, written after the death of his own son, was the final musical tribute to James, before a private burial service near to the family's home. Among the flowers, a poem from his distraught parents. We didn't get to say goodbye, and that really makes us cry. You brought so much love in our lives, that love for you will never die. The only thing that we can do is sit and pray for you. In our hearts you'll still be there, locked inside our loving care. God look after you as we would do, because we know that he is with you.
A moving occasion, Jonathan, but there were over the weekend accusations of self-pity in Liverpool. How's that gone down?
Well, they've been rejected by everybody in the city, of course. The local paper, the Liverpool Echo, says this evening those allegations are tantamount to rubbing salt into the wounds of Liverpool's grief. And as if to prove the point, another page full of tributes tonight to James Bulger in the in memoriam columns. There have been over 1,000 of these messages in the last couple of weeks or so. Evidence, say the people of Liverpool, of real and tangible grief. Evidence too, they've given over £20,000 from local people and businesses to charities in James Bulger's memory. And even some of the police officers who've been dealing with this case are still being counselled for the stress they've undergone because of the grief they felt personally over this loss.
James's death has had implications beyond Liverpool, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. I mean, I think that this death, this crime, together with various other incidents in the northeast of England, for example, a spate of joyriding, have helped to move juvenile crime right back up to the top of the political agenda. Both the Conservative and Labour parties have outlined new initiatives on juvenile crime, and I think we'll see more on that in the next couple of months or so.
Thank you, Jonathan.
The Observer revealed that both Venables and Thompson had passed A-levels during their sentences. The paper also stated that James Bulger family's lawyers had consulted psychiatric experts in order to present the parole panel with a report which suggested that Thompson is an undiagnosed psychopath, citing his lack of remorse during his trial and arrest. The report was ultimately dismissed. However, his lack of remorse at the time, in stark contrast to Venables, led to considerable scrutiny from the parole panel. Upon release, both Thompson and Venables had lost all trace of their Scouse accent. In a psychiatric report prepared in 2000 before Venables' release, he was described as posing a trivial risk to the public and unlikely to reoffend. The chances of his successful rehabilitation were described as very high. The Manchester Evening News published details that suggested the names of the secure institutions in which the pair were housed, in breach of the injunction against publicity that had been renewed early in 2001. In December that year, the paper was fined £30,000 for contempt of court and ordered to pay costs of £120,000. No significant publication or vigilante action against Thompson or Venables has occurred. Despite this, James Bulger's mother, Denise, told how in 2004 she received a tip-off from an anonymous source that helped her locate Robert Thompson. Upon seeing him, she was paralyzed with hatred and was unable to confront him. In April 2007, documents released under the Freedom of Information Act 2000 confirmed that the Home Office had spent £13,000 on an injunction to prevent a foreign magazine from revealing the new identities of Thompson and Venables. On 14th of March 2008, an appeal to set up a Red Balloon Learner Centre in Merseyside in memory of James Bulger was launched by Denise Fergus, his mother, and Esther Ranson. A memorial garden in James Bulger's memory was created in Sacred Heart Primary School in his hometown of Kirkby. the school he would have been expected to attend had he not been murdered. In March 2010, a call was made by England's Children's Commissioner Maggie Atkinson to raise the age of criminal responsibility from 10 to 12. She said that the killers of James Bulger should have undergone programs to help turn their lives around rather than being prosecuted. The Ministry of Justice rejected the call, saying that children over the age of 10 knew the difference between bad behavior and serious wrongdoing. In April 2010, a 19-year-old man from the Isle of Man was given a 3-month suspended prison sentence for falsely claiming in a Facebook message that one of his former colleagues was Thompson. In passing sentence, Deputy High Bailiff Alistair Montgomery said that the teenager had put that person at significant risk of serious harm and in a perilous position by making the allegation. In March 2012, a 26-year-old man from Chorley, Lancashire, was arrested after allegedly setting up a Facebook group with the title "What Happened to James Bulger Was Effing Hilarious." The man's computer was seized for further investigations. I mean, what the heck is wrong with people, seriously? Why would you do something like that? Something so disgusting. It's just... I don't get it. I don't get it. I'm losing my mind here. On 25th of February 2013, the Attorney General's office announced that it was, I can't pronounce this one, instituting contempt of court proceedings against several people who had allegedly published photographs online showing Thompson or Venables as adults. A spokesman said, quote, "There are many different images circulating online claiming to be of Venables or Thompson. Potentially innocent individuals may be wrongly identified as being one of the two men and placed in danger. The order and its enforcement is therefore intended to protect not only Venables and Thompson, but also those members of the public who have been incorrectly identified as being one of the two men." End of quote. On 26th of April, 2 men received suspended jail sentences of 9 months after admitting to contempt of court by publishing photographs that they claimed to be of Venables and Thompson on Facebook and Twitter. The posts were seen by 24,000 people. According to BBC legal correspondent Clive Coleman, the purpose of the prosecution was to ensure that the public was aware that internet users were also subject to the law of contempt. On 27th of November 2013, a man from Liverpool received a 14-month suspended prison sentence for posting images on Twitter claiming to show Venables. On 14th of July 2016, a woman from Margate in Kent was jailed for 3 years after sending Twitter messages to James Bulger's mother in which she posed as one of his killers and as James Bulger's ghost. The sentence was reduced to 2.5 years on appeal. On 25th of October, a man was jailed for 26 weeks for stalking Denise Fergus. He had previously received a police warning for stalking her in 2008. On 31st of January 2019, a man and a woman pleaded guilty to 8 contempt of court offences at the High Court after they admitted to posting photos on social media that they claimed identified Venables. Both received suspended prison sentences. On 13th of March 2019, actress Tina Malone was given an 8-month suspended prison sentence for posting Venables' identity on Facebook. In January 2020, a 53-year-old woman from Ammanford in South Wales received a prison sentence of 8 months, suspended for 15 months. In November 2017, she had published an alleged photograph of Venables on Facebook with the advice, "Share this as much as possible." Lord Justice Nigel Davies said that the offence was close to the line for an immediate prison sentence, but suspended the sentence after observing an early admission of guilt and remorse by the woman. Shortly before his 2001 release, when aged 17, Jon Venables was alleged to have had sex with a woman who worked at the Red Bank security unit where he was held. In April 2011, in the aftermath of his 2010 imprisonment, these allegations were outlined in a Sunday Times magazine article written by David James Smith, who had been following the Bulger case since the 1993 trial, and again later in a BBC documentary titled Jon Venables: What Went Wrong. The female staff member was suspended for sexual misconduct. She never returned to work at Red Bank. A spokesman for St. Helens Borough Council denied that the incident had been covered up, saying all allegations were thoroughly investigated by an independent team on the orders of the Home Office and chaired by Arthur de Frischling, a retired prison governor. Jon Venables began living independently in March 2002. Sometime after, he began a relationship with a woman who had a 5-year-old child. It's not known whether Jon had already begun downloading child abuse images at the time of dating the woman, although he denies having ever met the child. In 2005, when Jon was 23 years old, his probation officer met another girlfriend of his who was aged 17. After a number of young girlfriends, it was presumed that Jon Venables was having a delayed adolescence. Is this another word for justification? After a period of apparently reduced supervision, Jon Venables began excessively drinking, taking drugs and downloading child abuse images, as well as visiting Merseyside, which was a breach of his license. In 2008, a new probation officer said that he spent a great deal of leisure time playing video games and on the internet. In September that year, he was arrested on suspicion of a fray following a fight outside a nightclub. He claimed that he was acting in self-defense, and the charges were later dropped after he agreed to go on an alcohol awareness course. 3 months later, he was found to be in possession of cocaine. He was subjected to a curfew. On 2 occasions, he revealed his true identity to a friend. On 2nd of March 2010, the Ministry of Justice revealed that Jon Venables had been returned to prison for an unspecified violation of the terms of his license of release. The Justice Secretary, Jack Straw, stated that he had been returned to prison because of extremely serious allegations and stated that he was unable to give further details of the reasons for Jon Venables' return to custody because it was not in the public interest to do so. On 7th of March, media reports said that he had been accused of child pornography offences. In a statement to the House of Commons on 8th of March 2010, the Justice Secretary Straw reiterated that it was not in the interest of justice to reveal the reason why Venables had been returned to custody. Baroness Butler Sloss, the judge who made the decision to grant Venables anonymity in 2001, warned that Venables could be killed if his identity was revealed. James Bulger's mother, Denise Fergus, said she was angry that the parole board did not tell her that Venables had been returned to prison, and called for his anonymity to be removed if he was charged with a crime. A spokesperson for the Ministry of Justice stated that there was a worldwide injunction against publication of either killer's location or new identity. Jon Venables' return to prison revived the false claim that a man from Fleetwood, Lancashire was Jon Venables. While the claim was reported and dismissed in September 2005, it reappeared in March 2010 when it was circulated widely via SMS messages and Facebook. Chief Inspector Tracy O'Gara of Lancashire Constabulary stated, "An individual who was targeted 4.5 years ago was not Jon Venables, and now he has left the area." On 21st of June 2010, Jon Venables was charged with possession and distribution of indecent images of children. It was alleged that he had downloaded 57 indecent images of children over a 12-month period to February 2010 and had allowed other people to access the files through a peer-to-peer network. Venables faced 2 charges under the Protection of Children Act 1978. On 23rd of July, Venables appeared at the court hearing at the Old Bailey via video link visible only to the judge hearing the case. He pleaded guilty to charges of downloading and distributing child pornography and was sentenced to 2 years imprisonment. At the court hearing, it emerged that Venables had posed in online chat rooms as 35-year-old Donnie Smith, a married woman from Liverpool who boasted about using her 8-year-old daughter in the hope of obtaining further child pornography. Venables had contacted his probation officer in February 2010, fearing that his new identity had been compromised at his place of work. When the officer arrived at his flat, Venables was attempting to remove or destroy the hard drive of his computer with a knife and a tin opener. The officer's suspicions were aroused and the computer was taken away for examination, leading to the discovery of the child pornography, which included children as young as 2 years old being raped by adults and penetrative rape of 7 or 8-year-olds. The judge, Mr. Justice David Bean, ruled that Venables' new identity could not be revealed, but the media were allowed to report that he had been living in Cheshire at the time of his arrest. The High Court also heard that Venables had been arrested on suspicion of a fray in September 2008 following a drunken street fight with another man. Late that year, he was cautioned for possession of cocaine. In November 2010, a review of the National Probation Service handling of the case by David Ormond found that probation officers could not have prevented Venables from downloading child pornography. Harry Fletcher, the Assistant General Secretary of the National Association of Probation Officers, said that only 24-hour surveillance would have stopped Venables. He was eligible for parole in July 2011. On 27th of June 2011, the parole board decided that he would remain in custody and that his parole would not be considered again for at least another year. On 4th of May 2011, it was reported that Venables would once again be given a new identity following what was described as a serious security breach, which revealed an identity that he had been using before his imprisonment in 2010. Details of the breach could not be reported for legal reasons. A spokesman for the Ministry of Justice said, quote, "Such a change of identity is extremely rare and granted only when the police assess that there is clear and credible evidence of a sustained threat to the offender's life on release into the community." End of quote. The incident occurred after a man from Exeter posted photographs on a website devoted to identifying pedophiles, allegedly showing Venables as an adult and revealing his name. In November 2011, it was reported that officials had decided that Venables would stay in prison for the foreseeable future, as he would be likely to reveal his true identity if released. On 4th of July 2013, it was reported that the parole board for England and Wales had approved the release of Venables. On 3rd of September 2013, it was reported that Venables had been released from prison. On 23rd of November 2017, it was reported that he had again been recalled to prison for possession of child abuse imagery. On 5th of January 2018, Venables was charged with unspecified offences relating to indecent images of children. On 7th of February, he pleaded guilty to possession of indecent images of children for a second time. He pleaded guilty via video link to 3 charges of making indecent images of children and 1 of possessing a pedophile manual that included advice for would-be child molesters, including instructions on child grooming and evading detection. He admitted being in possession of 392 category A, 148 category B, and 630 category C child pornography images and was sentenced to 3 years and 4 months in prison. In September 2020, he was denied parole. On 4th of March 2019, James Bulger's father Ralph lost a legal challenge to lift the lifelong order protecting Venables' anonymity. Judge Andrew McFarlane turned down the request, saying that the uniquely notorious nature of the case meant there is a strong possibility, if not a probability, that if his identity were known, he would be pursued, resulting in grave and possibly fatal consequences. In late June 2019, it was reported that British officials considered resettling Jon Venables in Canada, Australia, or New Zealand due to the high costs behind protecting his anonymity. British authorities had allegedly spent £65,000 in legal fees to keep Jon Venables' identity a secret. In response to media coverage, the New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern remarked that Jon Venables would need an exemption under New Zealand's Immigration Act 2009 and that he should not bother applying. That was quite something. And the only reason why I decided to go through Jon's later life and offences is because I wanted to highlight just how hard the justice system and the police are working to conceal the identity of a killer and later turned pedophile. It's just unbelievable the amount of resources, the amount of money that they spend to protect his identity. A killer and a pedophile. Not to mention the judges who gave him all these insignificant sentences for these offenses. So my question really is the system working against the criminals or for the criminals? Because in my opinion, honestly, from what I've seen here, clearly they are not working for the victims. Even though Robert Thompson was believed to have been the leader of the James Bulger murder plot, he has never reoffended since he's been released. Not much is known about his current whereabouts, but it seems that he is apparently in a stable relationship with a man who is fully aware of his past. In 2011, the year James would have turned 21, Denise Fergus launches the James Bulger Memorial Trust. For too long, Denise has seen nothing good come from James's death, so encouraged by Esther Ranson and the Red Balloon charity, she's inspired to help benefit and support young victims of crime, hatred or bullying. Her plans are to reward those who have shown exemplary conduct in helping others. She wants to do this by providing cost-free travel and holiday accommodation for children and families. She creates James Bulger House. As recent as June 2022, thieves have targeted the grave of James Bulger. The little boy's heartbroken mom, Denise Fergus, revealed a sleeping stone cherub has vanished from her son's resting place. Her husband Stuart, James's stepfather, made the sickening discovery when he went to tend to the grave. Writing on Instagram, Denise said, quote, "So this morning Stuart went and cleaned James's resting place and put down some new flowers. He has come back and told me that this sleeping statue has been taken. It's made of concrete and has a bit of weight to it, so it hasn't blown off anywhere." Posting a photo of the missing statue, she said, "This is the only picture we can find. It's a lot cleaner than this now. So please keep your eyes open." And she also added, "How low do some people have to be to actually take from a baby's grave?" End of quote. I mean, that's just disgusting. Completely, honestly, completely horrendous. Just let that baby rest in peace. He had a beautiful, short life and a horrible, heart-wrenching death. At least give James some eternal peace. James is buried in the city's Kirkdale Cemetery. A parliamentary debate on whether a public inquiry should be held into James's murder is due to take place later this year. In June, Denise, now 53 years old, who has been calling for an inquiry, met Justice Secretary Dominic Raab, and days later it was announced a debate would take place. After the news was announced, Denise said, quote, "My family and friends and I are over the moon. I've had 29 years of unanswered questions, and this is a truly historic, momentous step towards change. Finally, we are making progress towards an inquiry. There have been too many failings over the years, and I just hope this will be the beginning of something that will leave a legacy in the name of James. I've been fighting for justice for James since day one. Also, to have all this happen before the 30th anniversary means so much. And if this helps make it easier for other families going through the justice system, then I can say I've had part justice for James. End of quote. Leon Fergus, James's brother, says it doesn't get any easier. James is still there for them. Tom Fergus, James's other brother, says it's heart-wrenching, especially knowing that he should have had an older brother. Michael Fergus, the other of the brothers, says that James has always been part of the family, and they even have a spare chair around the Christmas table for James, always empty. Their mom, Denise, likes seeing James there. Even though he's not there physically, they can still feel his presence. He will forever be loved. And this is the horrific story of 2-year-old James Bulger. The only thing that I will add on here is astounding efforts of the system to protect these murderers. Going as far as an international injunction is just completely mind-blowing. These kids were not sentenced as adults. These kids didn't spend time in adult prison. These kids apparently went through rehabilitation. Yes, okay, I understand that some kids, they go through rehabilitation and they turn out just fine. But I don't know, you guys, am I being too cold towards this? But I really think that murderers who are children shouldn't be given special treatment, especially these two. On 12th of February 1993, they had the plan in mind. This was premeditated murder of a baby. They knew exactly what they wanted to do, and they knew exactly that this was wrong. Otherwise, they wouldn't lie about being at the Strand that day. They tried to manipulate the police. They tried to work the police, and they blamed each other. If this doesn't tell you anything about these children, then I don't know what will. I don't see why they should be given an opportunity to live a normal life and be happy just like everybody else when they took that same opportunity away from baby James. And quite frankly, I'm gonna repeat myself. I feel like I keep going like a broken record here. I don't care about their PTSD or the flashbacks or the nightmares or being heartbroken. I don't think that they should have that right to try and gain sympathy. Also, as much as psychiatrists or psychologists are trying to say that they have been bullied, came from broken families, the environment, blah, 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 so are so many other kids. They had a hard life growing up, they've been bullied, their family is broken, and they don't turn out to be murderers. If you've paid attention to everything that I mentioned in this video, Jon Venables turned into a pedophile, or maybe he always was one. Not only did he turn into one, but it's not in the public interest to know who Jon Venables is. For all we know, he could be my neighbor, he could be your neighbor, your child's boyfriend, the cashier at the store. He could be just about anyone. And he's not only protected, but he's also being given all these light sentences for horrendous, horrible crimes. What is that teaching him and others who might follow? That it's perfectly fine to do this because you get off lightly, right? He even knows how to conceal things. How do you think he knows that? His identity is hidden. He's an adult now. He knows how it works. It's just mind-blowing to me, honestly. All of it is just mind-blowing. I personally will never be able to look at children the same way again. And I'm asking myself one last question. When will we start treating children as adults on the serious crimes that they committed? Not rehabilitation, because generally that doesn't teach you a lesson, not juvenile detention centers, but adult prisons with life sentences, the punishment should fit the crime, regardless of the age of the offender. You kill someone, you must pay for it at the full extent of the law. But it seems that in most cases, this fails. And then what do you have? Reoffendings. Because nobody is teaching these monster children a lesson properly, in my opinion. Thank you so much, guys, for watching today's video. Please do let me know what do you think in the comment section down below. Have you heard of the James Bulger case, and do you agree with me when I say that Jon Venables and Robert Thompson should have been held accountable for this horrific crime at the full extent of the law as adults, and maybe they should have spent their whole lives in prison? Please do let me know down below. For now, thank you so much for watching. Take care, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!